Hello doctor, here's my presentation. So here's the C++ project. So the program is designed to gather basic student information from their name all the way to their scholarship status and classify them based on the credit hours they gave when collecting input, and using that information to assign a dorm. It also uses their major to assign the dorm. And then the program also provides financing options for students without scholarships. That's important because it's a void function, because the default is they do have a scholarship and they don't need financing. More on that later. So as mentioned earlier, we collect data input, full name, credit hours, gender, major, and the scholarship status. And in the program, it'll specify, we don't say yes or no, we do 1 and 0, so 1 for yes, 0 for no. And the purpose of this section in the main function is to gather data, to get input or user information. So there are four functions in this program called A, B, C, or D. So A, I call it get classification, and it does exactly what it says. It determines a student's classification. You know, the typical freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, based on the credit hours that they put in the input section of the main function. So here's the raw code. And it's a basic if-else function. So here's the name, as we discussed earlier, and the information that it grabs from the main function. So if the credit hours is less than 30, it's a freshman. Greater than or equal to 30 but less than 60 credit hours is it'll be sophomore, so on and so forth. And then if it's greater than or equal to 90, it'll be junior, and if it's greater than that, it'll be a senior. And it'll store that value for the classification. So yeah, so it takes credit hours as input, and it returns the appropriate classification as a string, because it's a word. So this is the second function. So is STEM major, so it determines, is this person a STEM major? Checks a person's major and sees if it belongs in the STEM category. Now, for simplicity's sake, I did a 1D array, and it's the ones I put here are engineering, science, math, and technology. Of course, there's more majors within STEM, but you know, the beauty of arrays is you can put in whatever you want here, if you wish. So I define here a string called STEM. Okay, and that is this is what value is stored during the iteration of this loop here. So it goes through the STEM majors, and it says engineering. Okay, so then it stores it as STEM, and it asks if the major that you inputted equals that part of the loop. But if not, it returns, continues to the next. Science stores that as STEM, compares that if the major that you inputted equals that, and so on and so forth. And if it does, it returns true. But if you go through the entire thing and it doesn't, well, it'll return false. Simple as that. And that is the value that's stored for is STEM major, true or false, based on the comparison between the major and the STEM major outlined in the array. Like I said before, the beauty of this is you can add to this array if you want. A simple 1D array. Yeah, this is the more simple version of my explanation. The next function is assign dorm. So it does exactly what it says. It assigns a dorm based on their gender and whether or not they were a STEM major or liberal arts. So here's the raw code. So we have a simple 2x2 array here. The first column is for the STEM majors, the second column is for the liberal arts majors, row 1's for males, row 2's for females. So we have a simple if-else function here, and a Boolean here. If just in case the person puts a capital lowercase m, I didn't want the program to be confused, so if it's either one of these, it'll move on. If it's male or if it's female, it'll go into this section right here, which I'll explain. So I learned this thing through my basically refining period of this project. We have a little thing called a ternary operator here. So it's basically checking if the major was STEM from the previous determination, and if it's true, it'll return the value on the left side of the colon from the array. So if they were a STEM major and they were male as inputted here, it'll say that you return that dorm assignment. So row 0, row 0, column 0. So this one right here, and if not, that one right there. And same thing for females. And if not, it produces an error. There's a more simplified explanation for that section. The next function is displaying financial options. It's a void function because it determines first if they do have a scholarship. Here's an explanation. So here, a void function, display financing options. It grabs their classification and as well as the determination of whether or not they have a scholarship from the main function. So if the person has scholarship from the function that they input, it's revealed in the function, and it'll be inputted here. It'll return a value. It'll write out no financing needing scholarship covers expenses, and that's the default if they already have a scholarship. But if not, it'll move on to the next section here, where we have basically it's bigger. This one actually required 2 slides. It's a 2 by 3 2D array. Row 1 is the loan options for these classifications, and then the bottom row is for the seniors, for the reason I'll explain later. So I have here another what they call a nested ternary operator. So basically I wanted to create an indexing ability for based on whether what their classifications are. So if the classification was a freshman, if this is true, it will return a value of an assigned index. I call it 0. But if false, it moves on to the false value, which is the next one. And then it asks, is their classification sophomore? If it's true, it'll assign the index of 1. If not, move on, so on and so forth. And ask if their classification is junior, and if it's true, it'll assign an index value of 2. And if not, it'll go to -1. And the reason it stops there is because there are only 4 classifications. This is the index I wanted for the seniors, because of this next section here. So if their classification index 0, 1, 2, or -1 is greater than or equal to 0, it'll write out the available loan is defined by this by the array coordinates here. So we already know that anyone who matches a classification index of greater than or equal to 0 is either freshman, sophomore, or junior. So they're row 1. So therefore, they are row 1 or 0, which is the top row. And then their column number will be whatever classification index they were assigned through this this nested ternary operator here. So if they were, so their they were a classification index of greater than or equal to 0, so it goes to 0, 0 if they were a freshman, 0, 1 if they were a sophomore, 0, 2 if they were a junior, and if they were a senior, in which case they were a value, an index of less than or equal of less than 0. Then it would say instead, no financing option available for seniors. So freshmen, 0, 0, 0, 0, it'd be row 0, column 0, 1,000. They get the most, and then it gets less and less the higher up they go in classification. And here's a simplified explanation for how that works here, but I explained it in depth, so we'll move on. So here's the main function. So yeah, this is where where the program collects data input and gives the information as I define it in the main function to the functions that I defined before the main function, and it'll determine things. It'll determine the classification, their major, their dorm, and it'll give their financing details, and it'll display information using these functions and the values determined through data input. So yeah, so I have this is the point where you can pull up the code I sent in the PDF because it was too big for one page. So we'll skip the functions here and go to the main function. So here are the defined variables that are where the inputs are stored whenever they're gathered down here. Now I remember having a problem here because I realized that mixing getLine and sin, if you don't clear the input buffer like with a sin.ignore thing, what will happen is it won't even ask for the input. It'll just read the previous, it'll just assign it to the previously assigned storage. So you have to clear the input buffer and then getLine for the major whenever you're combining here sin and getLine. So that's why that's there. It took me a long time. That was that kind of like messed me up when I was first making this this part of the project. And for simplicity's sake, I assigned the functions to simple words. Yeah, and I didn't go over this earlier, but basically, yeah, there's a part in one of the functions where it says isStem, and the way it gets isStem is because of this part right here. It goes isStem major, and it equals bool isStem, okay? And that's how I'm able to use isStem within the function above. Let's see if I can find it. There you go, isStem in the dorm assignments. So if there's STEM, it's then it asks, yeah, we've been over this. It asks if there is STEM, if it's true, this one, false, this one, and so on and so forth. That's where it got that value from, because it converted the STEM function to the bool isStem. And when it gets all those things, runs the information through the functions, we then display the results. So there, it puts student information, name, major, credit hours, classification, their dorm, and their financing options. I did not give this function a name to just put here. I actually just wrote the function and the information that I wanted to send to the functions outside of the main function, and then return 0. So if we'll do a little dry run, so we have say their name's Alice, they have 45 credit hours, they put their gender's female, the major science, scholarship. It stores it in each of the variables that I defined, and then it runs them through the functions for get classification, credit hours. That would be sophomore. They've input their major science. It counts as true, which makes them a STEM major. And then it'll use that information, their gender and their whether or not they were a STEM major, to give them the dorm. So they're a female STEM dorm. And we determined already they're a sophomore, and they don't have a scholarship because they put in 0. And so, and so therefore it'll output the available loan is $500 because that's the number available for sophomores without a scholarship. And then it'll output all that in a nice little thing here: student information, name, major, credit hours, classification, assigned dorm, and financing options. And so that's my presentation. It proves the use of functions and how modular it is for input validation and data gathering and data application through those functions. The ability to assign dorms using the gender and major functions, as well as being able to give set financing options for classifications and scholarship status. And yeah, that's my presentation. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.